They say some fathers would walk through fire to protect their children. But what happens when a father becomes the very storm his son has to survive? Jamie had always known his father as a strict man, but once, long ago, Ethan was someone else. Before cancer took his wife, Jamie's mother, Ethan, had been a man of quiet smiles and gentle hands, someone who tucked his son in at night and with a kiss on the forehead and stories about the stars. That version of him died long before he did. By the time Jamie was 17, the man who raised him had turned into someone unrecognizable, a former Marine who once served with honor. Ethan now lived like the world owed him grief. He barked orders instead of asking questions. He spoke in rules, not love. In his house, emotion was weakness, and expectation was law. Jamie followed those rules. He kept his room spotless. He never missed a curfew. He studied hard, stayed out of trouble, and never ever spoke of the part of himself he knew would shatter what little remained between them. He was gay, and he was terrified his father would find out. But secrets have a way of surfacing, especially when you're young and clinging to connection like it's the last breath in your lungs. One evening, while Jamie was in the shower, Ethan found his phone buzzing on the kitchen counter. A message from someone named Leo lit up the screen. It wasn't just the name, it was the words. Sweet, intimate, unmistakable. I can't wait to hold you again. A heart emoji, a photo innocent, but enough. When Jamie came downstairs, towel around his neck, he saw his father sitting stiffly in the armchair, phone in hand, face blank. For a long moment, there was silence. And then Ethan stood. He didn't scream. He didn't rage. What he said was colder than either. I lost your mother to cancer, he muttered, voice low. And now I've lost my son too. I don't have a son who's gay. Jamie froze. Dad, please. But Ethan was already moving. He opened the front door wide, and with a look that held no mercy, pointed toward the storm outside. Rain poured onto the porch. Lightning cracked in the distance. Get out, he said, and don't come back, Jamie pleaded. He begged. Tears streamed down his face as he reached for his clothes, his bag, his phone. Ethan shoved the door wider. No, you leave with nothing. That's what you are to me now. So Jamie walked out into the cold night, barehanded, wearing only a hoodie and soaked sneakers. Each step felt like a rejection carved into his skin. And as he crossed the neighborhood street, he turned back once, not for hope, but to see if his father had changed his mind. He hadn't. The door slammed shut. That was the moment Jamie knew he was truly alone. His mother had been gone since he was 10, and now, whatever thread connected him to home had been cut. No suitcase, no charger, no plan. Just a broken heart in a town too small to hold space for who he truly was. As the wind howled and the rain fell harder, Jamie walked toward nowhere. And in that moment, he wasn't just grieving his father's rejection. He was grieving the father he used to know. If this story moved you, stay with us. This is just the beginning. Subscribe and follow Heart Story for the next chapter, because sometimes even the most shattered hearts can find their way back to love. Jamie wandered through the night, clothes soaked to his skin, the cold rain biting through fabric like it held a personal grudge. Every house he passed looked like a world he no longer belonged to, warm lights behind curtains, the silhouettes of families around dinner tables, distant laughter muffled by walls that kept the cold out and love in. He tried to think logically, tried to recall which friends might help him, even for a night. He scrolled through names in his mind like pages in a forgotten yearbook. But each possibility felt impossible. There was always a reason not to call. Some of them had strict parents, others weren't close enough, and a few had once whispered behind his back when they suspected the truth. Still, desperation forced him to try. He messaged an old classmate, no reply. Another friend, left on read. The only person who picked up the phone hesitated, then said in a voice filled with guilt, I can't. I'm sorry. That apology echoed in Jamie's mind for hours. With nowhere to go, Jamie found shelter where he could. A shuttered gas station awning kept the worst of the rain off one night. Another evening, he curled up in the supply room of a closed diner he had snuck into when the cleaning crew stepped out for a smoke. On the third night, he slept in the back seat of an empty bus parked at the depot, curled around himself like a child in hiding. Every morning came with a fresh coat of exhaustion. He tried to find work, anything to keep moving. He offered to wash dishes at a local cafe, sweep floors at a hardware store, clean out trash bins behind a bakery. But wherever he went, he looked too tired, too weak, too scattered to trust. His hands trembled. His stomach growled. He once dropped a plate while wiping tables and got yelled at by a manager who told him to leave before he made more of a mess. It wasn't just the lack of food or warmth, it was the constant feeling of invisibility, like he had become a ghost haunting the edge of a life he used to live. One afternoon, while walking down a quiet alley near the main road, a group of boys around his age spotted him. At first, he thought they might just walk past, but their eyes narrowed when they saw the rainbow keychain still clipped to his hoodie, a tiny symbol of hope. Once a gift from Leo. "What's that?" one of them muttered. They didn't wait for an answer. One shoved him hard into the wall. Another pulled at the keychain, yanking it until it snapped. Jamie raised his arms in defense, but a punch grazed his cheek. Before it could go further, a passing car's headlights startled them. The boys scattered like shadows in daylight. Jamie stumbled away, bruised, bleeding slightly at the lip. He didn't cry. Not this time. The tears had already been spent. That night, rain returned like a cruel ritual. Jamie crouched behind a row of dumpsters behind a rundown auto repair shop. He hadn't eaten that day. His hoodie was damp. His legs ached from walking. His heart felt like it was caving in from 1,000 small wounds. At some point, without meaning to, Jamie lost consciousness. He collapsed behind the building, hidden from sight. Just another forgotten figure swallowed by a town that offered no refuge. But fate had a strange sense of timing. Nolan, the shop's owner, had stayed late that night, finishing an oil change for a loyal customer. As he walked around the building to lock the back entrance, his flashlight beam caught a figure slumped beside the wall. At first, he thought it was a pile of rags. Then he saw the sneakers, then the face. An unfamiliar boy, soaked and shivering, skin pale from exposure, breathing shallow. Without a word, Nolan knelt beside him. He didn't ask who he was or why he was there. He just picked him up, not easily, but carefully, and carried him inside. That night, Jamie slept in a warm bed for the first time in days. A folded blanket covered his shoulders. A glass of water waited on the nightstand. A quiet fan hummed in the background. And somewhere in the house, a man named Nolan sat in silence, staring out the window at the rain, wondering how a boy like that had ended up with no one left to call home. The warmth of the room startled Jamie awake. For a few seconds, he forgot where he was. The bed beneath him didn't creak like the wooden benches or cold pavement he had grown used to. The blanket smelled of clean cotton, not dust or engine oil. His muscles ached, but the ache was dull now, muted by rest. He sat up slowly. There was a tray nearby, toast, a boiled egg, and a glass of orange juice. No note, no questions, no pressure. The man who brought him here had not returned that morning. Or, if he had, he'd done so quietly, letting Jamie decide what to do next. At first, Jamie didn't trust it. Kindness was not something he'd been offered freely in recent days. He spent that first day mostly silent, watching from behind door frames, unsure whether he was welcome or merely tolerated. Nolan, however, never questioned him. He simply moved through his routine, fixing cars in the garage, heating soup in the microwave, sweeping leaves off the front step. He didn't ask who Jamie was. He didn't press for answers. After 2 nights, Jamie found his voice. He stood in the kitchen, hands fidgeting at his sides, and said quietly, "I'm gay. My father found out. He told me to leave." He waited for the reaction. Tension gathered in his shoulders, ready for the flinch, the frown, the inevitable distancing that always followed. But Nolan didn't blink. "I don't care who you love," he said, wiping grease from his hands. "I care if you're decent, and you seem decent to me." Those words settled into Jamie like warmth after a storm. It wasn't acceptance laced with pity or a performance of tolerance. It was simple, honest, human. Later that evening, over dinner, Nolan shared a piece of his own past. He hadn't always owned a garage or lived alone. There had been a time decades earlier when he was a quiet, awkward teenager, constantly picked on for being too soft, for refusing to fight back, for not fitting into the boxes boys were expected to live in. "I was maybe 15, Nolan said, his voice steady but distant. "Some older kids cornered me behind a store. I thought they were going to beat me senseless. I don't even remember what I said that set them off, but someone stopped them." Jamie listened closely. He was a young man, military uniform. I never got his name, but he stood between me and them like I was worth protecting. Told them to back off, and they did. I never forgot what he told me afterward. Nolan's gaze lingered on the steam rising from his coffee cup. He said, "You deserve love, kid. You don't have to be like anybody else to earn it." Jamie's chest tightened. The words were so familiar. He had heard them before, somewhere in a story his mother once told him when he was small. Nolan continued, "I always hoped I'd meet that man again. Thank him. Never did." But Jamie didn't say anything, because suddenly he knew that man, decades younger, in uniform, already shaped by duty and yet capable of compassion, was his father. Ethan, the same man who had thrown him out of the house without hesitation, who had once, long ago, stood between a scared boy and harm. It didn't make sense. Not fully, but memory can erode under grief, and grief had reshaped Ethan into someone Jamie barely recognized. The realization hung in the air like fog neither of them could see through. Jamie didn't tell Nolan the truth. Not yet. He wasn't ready. Maybe part of him feared that if Nolan knew, the comfort of this place might vanish too. So he stayed quiet. But something shifted. In Nolan's calm presence, in his steady gestures and quiet faith in human decency, Jamie began to breathe differently. He stopped counting the hours. He let his body rest. And for the first time in days, he laughed softly, unexpectedly, when Nolan burned toast and blamed the toaster. Outside, autumn crept slowly across the town, but inside that modest home behind the garage, warmth had returned. Jamie was still grieving, still lost, but now he was no longer invisible. And sometimes being seen was the first step back toward being whole. News spread quietly in the small town. Ethan, once known for his rigid presence and sharp opinions, had been taken to the hospital after an altercation with a neighbor ended in a fall. It wasn't life-threatening, but serious enough to leave him partially immobilized and dependent on care for the first time in years. The hospital room was cold and sterile, much like the way Ethan had lived in the years following his wife's death, functional, detached, devoid of softness. He stared at the ceiling tiles in silence. Nurses checking on him in routine cycles. No visitors entering his name on the registry. There was no Jamie. He was alone. The days passed, each one a dull repetition of quiet meals, checkups, and the humming of machines. In that silence, memories began to drift back, uninvited but persistent. Not the discipline or control he had clung to so fiercely, but the little things. His wife's laughter when Jamie said his first word, the way Jamie had once run through the backyard wearing a cape, convinced he could fly. The feeling of holding his son in his arms, small and warm, full of trust. That child hadn't disappeared. He had simply grown up, and Ethan had pushed him away. Why? The question dug into him, again and again. Why had he let fear take over? Why had he let one part of Jamie's identity define his worth as a son? He had told himself it was about discipline, about values. But in the quiet of that hospital bed, those justifications crumbled. Beneath them, all that remained was grief, grief that had turned to anger, and anger that had turned to cruelty. I lost my wife, he whispered one night, eyes wet in the dark. And then I made sure I lost my son. No one heard him, but he said it anyway, for the first time in years. Ethan wept not with the bitterness of a man hardened by loss, but with the sorrow of someone finally realizing the weight of his own destruction. In a dream later that night, he saw her, his wife, not sick and fading, but vibrant as she had once been. She stood at the foot of his bed and looked at him not with anger, but with sadness. "You promised to protect him," she seemed to say, though her lips didn't move. "Not to control him." Ethan woke with her name on his tongue and tears on his face. Somewhere across town, Nolan saw the same news in a local paper, folded on the counter of a gas station. He read the short article twice. No family had come to visit. The reporter had described Ethan as reclusive and private, though the subtext was clear he was a man people avoided. Nolan returned home that evening, the newspaper tucked under his arm. Jamie was sorting through some old parts in the garage, trying to stay busy. His cheeks looked fuller, his posture straighter, but the sadness hadn't left him. Not entirely. Nolan held out the paper, said nothing. Jamie read the headline. He blinked once, then read it again. The room felt suddenly still. "He's in the hospital," Jamie asked quietly. Nolan nodded. No one's been by to see him." Jamie looked away. His jaw tightened. "I don't owe him anything." "I know," Nolan replied. A long silence passed. Finally, Nolan spoke again, softer this time. "But if you had one chance to say what needed to be said, would you want to take it?" Jamie didn't answer right away. The part of him that still bore the scar of that rainy night wanted to stay silent. But deeper than that, beneath the pain and resentment, was a question he hadn't dared ask. What if his father regretted it? What if there was still something to salvage, not for Ethan's sake, but for his own? "I don't want forgiveness," Jamie said at last. "And I'm not going there to ask for his." "You wouldn't be," Nolan said gently. Jamie nodded. "Then maybe I just need to tell him one thing." That night, he packed a small bag, not for moving out, just for the day. He didn't know what he would find, but he knew this: if his father was still breathing, then the story between them wasn't finished. Not yet. Jamie stepped through the hospital doors with a strange weight pressing against his chest. Not fear, not hate, but something deeper, harder to name. He didn't come seeking reconciliation. He didn't need closure neatly wrapped with apologies and hugs. What he needed was truth, to speak it, to hear it, to face it. The nurse at the reception desk pointed him to room 214. No one else had signed in under Ethan's name. Jamie stood in the doorway for a long time before entering. His father looked smaller somehow, slouched in a wheelchair by the window. His once rigid posture had softened. One arm trembled slightly with each movement. His eyes were distant, trained on the gray clouds outside. For a moment, Jamie almost turned back, but he didn't. He stepped inside. Ethan didn't recognize him at first. His eyes moved slowly to meet Jamie's, and there was confusion there, then recognition, and something fragile flickered behind it. Jamie broke the silence. "I didn't come for your approval," he said. "I didn't come to beg for love or forgiveness." He paused. His voice didn't shake. "I came to give you a chance, to choose differently this time, to say something, anything, before it's too late." Ethan's lips parted, but no words came out at first. Then, quietly, he whispered, "You came back." Jamie sat down, only for a moment. The silence between them was no longer a wall. It was space holding the weight of years lost and words unsaid. Ethan reached out, fingers trembling, and touched Jamie's hand. Not with force, just enough to anchor himself. "I'm sorry," he said, tears rising in his eyes. "For everything. I was afraid, I thought I was losing you, but I lost myself instead." Jamie said nothing. He let his father speak. "I was wrong," Ethan continued. "So wrong. And I've lived with that every day since you left." Jamie didn't know if forgiveness was what he felt, but he did feel something shift inside too. a knot loosening, a breath he hadn't known he'd been holding, finally released. Then, gently, Jamie began to share what Nolan had told him that decades ago. A man in uniform had protected a scared boy, and with one sentence planted a seed of hope. Ethan's eyes widened. He blinked slowly, trying to remember. That boy. Nolan, he asked. Jamie nodded. Ethan leaned back in the chair, eyes distant again. That line, about being worthy of love, that wasn't mine. Jamie looked up. It was your mother, Ethan whispered. She told me that when I came home from my first tour, I was angry at the world. Didn't think I deserved her. She said, everyone deserves love. Ethan, you don't have to be like anyone else to earn it. I never forgot that. His voice cracked. But I forgot how to live it. Jamie swallowed hard. In that moment, the past, the pain, the guilt, they didn't disappear. But they stopped defining everything between them. There was something left behind. Not a fix, but a beginning. Weeks later, Ethan returned home, not to the cold, empty house he once ruled, but to Nolan's garage, where a small room had been set up for him. He needed a wheelchair now, but he moved slower in more ways than one, watching life pass with more reverence, less demand. On a quiet afternoon, Nolan stood trimming flowers outside the garage. Jamie sat beside him, arranging blooms in a reused mason jar. Leo was there too, sleeves rolled up, grease under his fingernails, laughing softly at a joke Nolan had just told. Ethan watched from the porch, hands folded in his lap. He didn't interrupt. He just watched. Jamie looked up and met his gaze. No words were exchanged. None were needed. Later, as the sun dipped behind the roof, casting gold light across the gravel driveway, Jamie whispered not to anyone in particular, but perhaps to the memory of his mother, or maybe just to himself. They say kindness always comes back. Maybe not right away, maybe not how you expect, but only if your heart stays open. And now, we ask you, would you give someone like Ethan a second chance? Could you open your heart to someone who once broke it? Tell us what you would do in the comments below. Your voice matters. Follow Heart Story for more stories that stay with you long after they end.